Hey everybody, this is Stream, and today we have a 5-game slate here for hockey on FanDuel. So before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Helps the channel quite a bit. So with that said, let's get into the slate itself. Starting with goalies here, we're going to look at Linus Ullmark. He's $8,600. He's been averaging about 23 fantasy points a game, and he has a pretty high floor. He's had some really good games lately as well. A little bit inconsistent, but still pretty good. And he's a top play overall on the slate. Then we'll look at Igor Shesterkin for the Rangers. He's a decent play. He's been a little bit more inconsistent than Igor. He obviously is a little bit less expensive. He's actually averaging about 16 fantasy points, and his floor is actually a little bit higher, though, at 43 approximately on this particular matchup. He's had some really big games, but he's been a little rusty last couple games. But he's still getting a lot of wins this season, so I do like him. Then we're going to look at Thatcher Demko. He's my value goalie here. He's averaging a very low fantasy point per game because he's had some really bad ones. But he's also had some pretty good ones so far. He's a very good value play just if you need to save money and you're trying to get a low end if you're trying to save money at this position. I don't usually recommend that, but he's decent enough that he could, and he's favored to win today, I think, so he has some upside in this particular matchup. He does give up a decent chunk amount of goals, though, so just keep that in mind. Then we're going to look at centers. So Steven Stamkos for Tampa Bay. Now he's averaging almost 18 fantasy points a game, and his ceiling's in the mid-40s. He's been pretty good so far this season. Been a little bit inconsistent as of late, but overall still has a lot of upside. Obviously pretty high priced. Then we look at Braden Point. He's another guy that's averaging about 17, well, closer to 16, but he's had some really big games lately. He has a lot of upside in this matchup, and I expect him to do well here. His ceiling is around the mid-30s, a little bit less than Stamkos, but he's still a really good player. Then let's see here, Evgeny Ketsnov. Here he at $6,100. His average is a little bit lower than some of the other guys on the slate. Obviously, his prices. This is some value guys. He's averaging about 12, and he's got a ceiling of around 36. He's had some extremely big games, but he's also had a lot of letdowns. His minutes have fluctuated a little bit as well, so do keep that in mind. But he does have some upside in this matchup, and so I do like him here. Then we'll look at Vincent Trocheck. He's been really solid so far outside the last couple of games. He's been pretty good most of the season, but he averages about 14 fantasy points a game, and his ceiling is a little bit lower, around in the mid-30s. But he has had some really crazy games, like the game against Dallas where he got a couple goals and stuff. So he is definitely capable, and he is favored to win today, so I do like him here. Mark Schiefel for Winnipeg. He's had a pretty good chunk of goals this season. His average is around 14, and he's got the highest ceiling for the cheap guys on the slate for centers at around 40 to 45. He's had some really good games this season, and he's been decently consistent, getting shots and stuff like that. So I do like him quite a bit today. Mark Scheifele, sorry, that's who I just talked about. Logan Couture is the last guy I'm going to mention here at $5,600. He's a good value play here. He's averaged about 12 fantasy points per game, and his ceiling is in the mid-30s. As you can see, he's actually been pretty consistent as of late, having 15 to 20 point games mostly. So going into the wings, we're going to look at Nikita Kirchhoff. I don't know how to say your name. Sorry about that. He's very expensive here, but he has an extremely high ceiling, in almost to 50. He's been really solid most of the games. He actually only had a really bad game last game out, but he should bounce back and have a really solid one here. He's getting lots of assists, lots of shots on goal and stuff like that, so he has plenty of opportunity, and he's playing good complement of minutes. Then we'll look at Artemi Panarin at $8,400. His fantasy points per game are nearly 17, and his floor is around 40. He's been pretty consistent most of the season, but he's had a couple off games lately. But I still think he's in a great spot and a good matchup for him. Brad Marchand for Boston. Now, he doesn't have as many goals as some of the other guys, but he's still got average around 18 fantasy points, and he's got a high floor or high ceiling in the mid 40s. And so if he can score some goals, that would definitely boost his score. But overall, he's been getting pretty good stats, generally speaking. Then we're going to look at Alex Ovechkin. He is at $7,800. He's averaging about 16 fantasy points a game, and his ceiling is around the mid 40s as well. He's a really good value play, a really good base play here on the slate. I do like him quite a bit in this matchup. Then we'll look at Chris Kreider for the Rangers. He's in an interesting position here. He's been pretty inconsistent, but up until recently where he's been pretty good. He's had a couple off games, but his ceiling is pretty high at 50, almost 50, which is really good for a guy that's only $6,600. Then we're going to look at Kyle Connor for Winnipeg. Now he's at $6,500. His average is around 13. As you can see, he's been pretty inconsistent this season, but overall he has some upside here. He's got a 35, 40 point ceiling in this matchup. Then we'll look at Clayton Keller for $5,900, the cheapest wing here. He's actually been really good the last few games. Hopefully that will continue here. His ceiling is around 35. He's averaging about 15. He's probably one of the better value plays on the slate overall. Then for defensive players, really wasn't a lot to love here at the defensive position. But Erik Karlsson is definitely one guy I did like. Okay, his averaging about 20 fantasy points a game, and his ceiling is in the mid 40s, which is pretty good for a defensive player. Though he has been a bit inconsistent early in the season, he has been really good lately, exception of the last game he played. But overall, he has a lot of upside in this matchup. Then we'll look at John Carlson for Washington. He has been injured some, but his price point is a little bit lower than what he probably will be as the season progresses. He's at 15 fantasy points per game about, and his ceiling is around 39. He's a pretty decent play assuming that he's good to go in the game. Adam Fox is a guy that I like today at $7,200. His floor and ceiling are very similar to Carlson, and they're about the same price. He's been pretty good the last few games, and so I do think he's in a good spot here. And then finally, Victor Hedman. Now, Hedman, he's not as expensive, but he's been a little bit more inconsistent this season. He's averaging around 13 fantasy points a game, but he still has a pretty high floor, or ceiling is around the 30. So I think he's still a pretty decent value play on this overall slate. Obviously, the slate is kind of interesting because of the size, but there is a decent amount of value. I wouldn't say that there's a ton, unfortunately. So it's going to make this slate a little bit difficult. You're probably going to have to pay down. I would recommend paying down at defense, just because there's really not much available at that position, and utilize your utility spots to get the to kind of take some risks on some value plays. But overall, it's a pretty interesting slate. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.